The October Day books, the premise of those is that fairy, as described in Western European mythology and folklore, is real. The Fae do exist. They just, as they always have, keep themselves mostly out of sight. And as a consequence, a lot of our stories about them are as accurate to what fairy really is as Xena Warrior Princess was to actual ancient Greece. Now, people ask, where did this start? Where did it come from? And there are a lot of different answers. At its root, the October Day books are a novelization of my childhood My Little Pony game. It started when I was 7. It is still ongoing in a room in my house where the door is shut. I go in and I move the ponies around periodically and progress the plot. And I'm just writing the whole thing out with bipeds instead of horses. More than that, though, the series as we know it began when I went to the Japanese tea gardens in Golden Gate Park and got myself stuck on top of the Moon Bridge, which is this almost perfectly circular bridge over a little stream that feeds into a lake full of koi. And so I'm trapped on the Moon Bridge. I cannot figure out how to get down without jumping into the lake of koi and getting myself thrown out of the park. And I just had this line pop into my head of spending 14 years as a koi in Golden Gate Park's Japanese tea gardens does very little for one's outlook on life. So I went home and I wrote a short story based around that kind of prompt that I had given myself and introduced myself to October Day. It was 14 pages long. It's called Of Koi Fish and October Days. And at the time, it was the single best thing I had ever written. I had wanted to be a writer for a while, but I was not quite finding that initial spark thing. I wasn't finding the, as Stephen King puts it, the button to turn on the machine. And I wrote that and I showed it to some friends of mine, including my at the time girlfriend. And she read it and said, Toby wants a novel. And I said, Toby doesn't have a novel. There's not any story there. She's just depressed and alone, and there's nowhere to go. And her response was, Toby wants a novel. And I was 19, and I really, really wanted her to stop telling me Toby wanted a novel and get back to letting me touch her boobs. So I said I would try to write Toby's novel if I could touch her boobs. And so she pretty much went, yeah, okay, we can do that. And we made out. And then I went and wrote a novel. To maintain my access to boobs. Because 19-year-olds, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, the majority of them will do anything for access to boobs. My favorite thing, I tell people when they ask, what's your research process? And they're like, what's your research process for Toby? And I go, well, I went to UC Berkeley for a folklore degree, and that was pretty much it. So my favorite thing about reaching more deeply into Toby's world has been getting to use parts of what I learned and not feel like I wasted my early 20s doing something that does not inform my later adult life at all, because that is a regret I did not want to have. Toby has been a marvelous excuse to travel to places, to meet people, to talk to folklorists, and to occasionally buy overly priced, rare folklore books that I otherwise could not justify to myself. There is a book called the Arne Thompson Index to Motifs in Folklore and Folk Literature. It is one of the foundational works of our field. It includes all of the different taxonomic typings for stories, mostly from that Western European region, and the elements that they have in common. And it comes in and out of print. It's currently out of print, very out of print. The only way you get a copy of the Arne Thompson Index is if someone retires or dies. There are not very many in circulation. And a couple years ago, I could look it up, probably about 2010 at this point, more than a couple years, but a couple years ago, the state folklorist of Minnesota retired. And she sold a lot of her collection through Magers and Quinn bookstore in St. Paul. And I had at the time an alert set up to tell me if an Arne Thompson index came up for sale anywhere. And it told me St. Paul, Minnesota. So I got on a plane and I went to St. Paul, Minnesota. And when I got there, I found a complete Arne Thompson index. It's beautiful. It's 6 volumes. It was $500, which, is a lot of money in 2010 money. It's still a lot of money now, but it was even more money then. And I bought that thing. I'm like, I can eat ramen. I can eat ramen for a whole quarter. And I bought that thing and had it shipped to my house in California. And later that summer in July, I was at San Diego Comic Con. And Paul Cornell, who's another author and a friend of mine, comes and grabs me and goes, "Come over with me," and drags me to Bill Wellingham, who is a comic author. He wrote a series called Fables, which is about fairy tale characters living in New York in the real world. Drags me over to Bill and says, "Bill, this is Seanan. You're both folklorists. Seanan, Bill will be interviewing you on stage at Worldcon in a month and a half. Find something to talk about." And then he leaves, and it's just the two of us standing there. And we're like, "Okay, well, this is awkward. And what are we going to talk about?" And Bill goes, "So you're a folklorist, eh?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "Did you know that the state folklorist of Minnesota just retired?" And I'm like, amusingly enough, yes, I was aware of that. And he says, "Great. I was on book tour and some out of town snuck in and sharked her onto Arn Thompson index right out from underneath me. What do you think of that?" And he is clearly expecting me to be righteously angry on his behalf. And I said, "I'm the out of town." We are still ongoing. Silver and Lead follows directly on from the events of Sleep No More and The Innocent Sleep, and is going to be dealing with some of the fallout from the really nasty enchantment that the local fairy area got hit with in those books. In Magic the Gathering terms, someone that was able to cast a world enchantment cast it, and it affected all players, and everyone had to deal with the consequences. Enchantments are usually more localized. You cast them on your own board, you can't cast them necessarily on somebody else. And so Silver and Lead picks up where those left off almost exactly and is dealing with some of the necessary cleanup. It is a little bit of a pause. The stakes are somewhat lower, which you have to do periodically in an ongoing series. You can't save the world every week. If you do that, things get boring and they stop having any urgency behind them.